The perspectives expressed in this podcast are those of the host and guests. The views expressed are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of the National Institute of Health or the United States government.
Hey, Sickle family. I'm Wumi Bakare.
And I'm Dima Hendricks. And we would like to welcome you to the Through the Genes podcast,
where we talk about living, healing, recovering, and exploring curative therapies for sickle cell disease.
We will also talk about our individual curative therapy journeys and the bond that we built as sickle cell sisters.
Hey, sis. So, we've been having very informative discussions over the course of shooting this podcast series, but I think we haven't really given the audience some backstory as to our why. Why did we consider curative therapies? What's been your journey like in your experience?
In my experience, it was 2018, and it was the first time I was given an opportunity to potentially cure this disease. Now, if I rewind backwards, I decided to become a mother early because I thought I wasn't going to live past the age of 30. Before, I wasn't going to live. Doctors told me, oh, you're not going to live past 15, or you're not going to live past 30. There was always an extended expiration date. And I would that extended date made me become a mother too soon. As soon as I graduated high school, I'm like, it's time for me to be a mom. I want the joy of holding a child, which is why I have a 21-year-old now. And I wanted to get married as soon as possible. Got married at 26. And I did not think I would be entering into 15 years of marriage. I thought I would just have marriage for a couple of years, and I thought I would die. So when 2018 presented itself in the hospital and the opportunity, we were recruited for a curative therapy, I was the first person on the list because now I had 2 children and a husband that I wanted to live for. And I, again, did not want to see another expiration date. And I did not want to expire or die before. I just didn't. I wanted to be here for my children. My mother died when I was 12. I became an orphan at 12. So I felt like I wanted to be here for my kids. So that was my why.
That was deeply personal. And I think in sharing your stories, I'm continuously inspired by you, but I can't wait for the rest of the world to fully understand your why as well, because walking through life in your shoes has not been easy. For me, I think I was at such a pivotal moment in my career as an entertainment publicist. And I think, I know that sickle cell robbed me of so much. Like I shared in our introductory conversation, I came on a vacation and everything spiraled. And initially, the doctors had given me 6 months to live. And for me, I think the burden of sickle cell disease didn't just impact my physical health, it really took a toll on my mental health. And I genuinely didn't want to let sickle cell rob me of anything else. So I had a very deep conversation with God, and I told God I didn't want to live to see 30 if I was still going to navigate life with sickle cell disease because it stole so much. And so for me, in telling my story, I always like to highlight that 4 days to my 30th birthday was when I found out that my brother would be a match for a stem cell transplant. And I looked at it as God saying, I got you. I've always
Wow.
had you. Your cure was the person that had a front row seat to all of your worst crises, all of your emergency surgeries. And so for me, it was a big, bright neon sign that God was saying, I heard your prayer, the same prayer you've had for years. And this is the moment when I think you are equipped to best receive the gift. So that is kind of at the heart of my why, is I genuinely wanted a better quality of life. I wanted to excel. I wanted sickle cell to not limit the length and breadth of my own personal goals for Wumi. Um, and so I said, the only way I would be able to attain this, because I had tried all others, I think what I want people to take away from this is that for a lot of us patients, we've tried every medication, every herb, every supplement, every holistic approach that people have recommended. Eat more salads, drink more water, practice yoga. We try all of those solutions and nothing quite gets us to a point where we're completely pain free. And so that desperation,
Mm.
why for me, I had to make the hard decision of saying, there's got to be more to life than the cyclical pattern of sickle cell disease. And that is kind of my story and context.
Wow. I want to thank you for sharing your vulnerability because as a Nigerian woman, 'cause
Mhm.
we tried to be, well, not we, because I'm not like that. I'm not built like that anymore. But as a Nigerian woman, I recognize as a Nigerian woman that's a deeply personal story. And it was very hard for you to share your vulnerability on this platform. Um, and I understand wholeheartedly. I understand what sickle cell can do and how it can rob you of everything. I mean, I went from wanting to be a dancer to wanting to be a singer, and then I had to switch careers and had to switch this. And okay, maybe I can, be a therapist. Oh, you don't have the capacity to do that. Maybe you could, and I've had to readjust my dreams because of sickle cell disease. And now I see that you're in that space as well. And I honor your vulnerability, and I honor the fact that you were able to pivot in such a beautiful way.
Thank
So again, thank you for sharing that.
Of course, sickle cell forces us to adjust our expectations.
Mm,
I think it's a common thread with all warriors. We have big goals, we have bright ideas, we have the purest of intentions as far as our dream goes, and sickle cell humbles you
mm,
in an interesting way, but in a way that really harnesses that title of warrior,
mhm.
because a warrior will always find an alternate strategy. And I feel like that's how we approach life and our goals as well.
What plan are you on yet? Are you on plan C, Z, X? What plan are we on? I think I'm on plan mm, probably FZ. You gotta go through all the letters of the alphabet and try again. I think I'm way down there.
Okay.
I Yeah. What plan do you on plan Z yet? Like, have you
I will
reached?
say, I will do a double entendre and I will say, I'm on plan G. I'm on God's plan, because God's plan is greater than any one plan I have for myself. So I'm exactly where I need to be. I didn't always see it. I didn't always believe it. And patience is a virtue I do not have. Never had it. I don't know if I ever will. But God has bent me to mold me. And so
Yes.
I like to look at life from his lens, not my
Yeah.
lens.
Episode 2: The Patient Perspective with Jimi Olaghere.
And today we have someone who is a warrior, an advocate, but more importantly, a dad, CRISPR gene editing recipient, Jimi Olaghere. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So For a lot of people who don't know, you are one of the chosen few that participated in the CRISPR gene editing treatment. And so I want you to talk to us today about your life with sickle cell disease leading up to the point where you decided to sign up for this clinical trial.
Life before the clinical trial was kind of hopeless. My quality of life was really, really poor, and in and out of the hospitals, constant admissions, mental health in the gutter as well. Just really not doing great. That's why I actually was looking for a solution. My parents were really, really worried, and they had been pushing me to figure out some solution to drastically improve my quality of life. And luckily, well, not luckily, I'd done some long-standing research, and that's how I found genetic therapies. And at the time, right before the transplant, aside from just having really poor quality of life and feeling hopeless, my wife was also like 8 months pregnant and having the disease, living with the disease for almost 35 years at that point. It's basically I'd won every battle that I had faced in my life, every goal, every plan I had set, sickle cell had altered that in some shape or form. And with fatherhood, that's one I really wanted to win. And I got really fortunate that the timing worked out really well, that right before my son was born, this transplant or this clinical trial rather was available.
So, just to give our audience a bit of context, what type of sickle cell disease did you have? Because for a lot of people, there's a curiosity as to, for you to have been dealing with a difficult quality of life, what are some of the sickle cell complications you also were dealing with at the time?
So I still have it, even though I've gone through the clinical transplant. My gene editing was not the actual sickle cell mutation. It was targeting BCL11A, which is hemoglobin F. So I still have it, but completely feel a lot better. So the types of I had sickle cell SS, or I have sickle cell SS, and aside from just the pain that we deal with on a daily basis, I had avascular necrosis. My gallbladder was taken out. I've had multiple pulmonary embolisms, multiple heart attacks. Not thankfully, my liver's still with me. But many scares, I should say. Still avoiding having a hip replacement from avascular necrosis. I think I mentioned cardiac arrest, just pneumonia, acute chest syndrome, you name it. Now I actually have to have a surgery. This was actually because of my sickle cell as well. I have chronic sinusitis, which I'm actually getting fixed next week. I'm having surgery to fix that. So from all the acute chest syndrome and chest infections I had, with all the pain medication, I got this really bad, long standing episode of sinusitis that I haven't been able to get rid of. It's still affecting me right now as we speak. So tons and lots of complications.
So, Jimmy, thank you for giving us the context of your sickle cell and the severity. So now, can you walk us through how you found out about the gene editing process and what made you opt into it?
So I had been researching. At first, well, my parents at first really wanted me to have a bone marrow transplant because that's all they knew. Bone marrow transplant, you know. So I went through the process of getting that done by testing my sisters to see if there'll be a match for me for bone marrow donors, and that didn't work. And after that, they were surprised that that didn't work, and they're like, "All right, there has to be some other solution out there." And that's when I started researching gene editing. I had seen a story um, about genetic engineering or genetic therapies, but this was used in not so positive way. I had seen that story. It's pretty popular about twins. I'm sure everyone knows what I'm referring to. And I was like, well, if they can do that for cosmetic things, I'm sure they can do it for serious diseases. And that's when I'm like, well, this could be something potential in the future that can cure a genetic disease like sickle cell. And then lo and behold, as I continue doing research, say, oh, they're actually testing this, although not on humans yet, but it looks like they are testing this type of therapy to cure sickle cell. And then I put a Google alert on gene therapies, gene editing with sickle cell. If anything eventually comes up, that I'll get that alert in my inbox. And I was thinking this will probably be 10 years, 20 years in the future that I'll probably get a response from this Google alert. Well, about 2 years later, I got an alert in my inbox. It was an NPR article. I'll never forget it. It was about a woman named Victoria Gray that had her genes edited to alleviate the symptoms of her sickle cell. And read that article. As soon as I got to the end of it, we contacted the team that was responsible for putting on that clinical trial. And the next day, they called us back, and the rest, as we say, is history.
Now, you walk through the logistics of your research and trying to find your cure, but walk me through, if you will, your feelings about going into the process because we have some warriors that went through the process that said it was desperation, they had fear. There was a lot of different mixed emotions from different warriors. So, if you could walk me through your feelings while you were doing the research.
I was feeling quite hopeful. At this point, I wasn't quite desperate yet when I first started um, research on it. It wasn't until my wife had become pregnant that I now got to that period of desperation myself because I'm like, all right, well, now I really need to make sure that I'm here and I'm doing okay to make sure I'm providing for my child. So I instantly, as soon as my wife became pregnant, I instantly transitioned from definitely hopeful, but from hopeful to more desperation too. Like, all right, I need something fast. And that's how it went. For me, I think the fear didn't really come. Obviously, there were some instances of, okay, I'm kind of charting into the unknown here, but I didn't start feeling that until I was actually in the trial. But before all of that, I was just like, oh my God, get me this treatment as soon as possible.
So it sounds like the reality of life is with your wife's pregnancy, there was a clock ticking in essence, because you wanted to be present, but also you wanted to be hands on with your kids, especially when you become a father. But can you, in layman's terms, in as simple terms as possible, explain the gene therapy process to us? Because there have been a plethora of explanations, but we want to understand what was the CRISPR gene therapy treatment like for you? Can you give us kind of a picture of it from the start of the process when they were going through the eligibility criteria to your day zero?
Yeah. So, in simplest form, the process was quite straightforward. It was cumbersome in the fact that there were many moving pieces, but the short of it is basically what they were doing was they were extracting stem cells from me that contained a specific DNA that they could then take to a lab, re-engineer that DNA to start doing something else. And in my case, that DNA was BCL11A, or that gene rather was BCL11A. And what they did was they turned it off.
Okay.
They silenced it because when it's on, what it does, it stops the production of fetal hemoglobin. But once they turned it off outside of my body, after the extraction process, they reinfused it back into me. And now that this gene is off, I'm now producing fetal hemoglobin like I did while I was in utero. Fetal hemoglobin we only produce while we're in utero. So the process to get all of that done was the first step was, making sure you're healthy, getting blood transfusions, blood exchanges as needed for a few months to go through the whole phases of the trial. And then the next stage is the collection process where they try to collect as many stem cells as possible to edit. And then after that process, you have to go through the conditioning process where they are clearing out the old stem cells through chemotherapy to make room for the new one that they've collected and by now probably edited, silenced, addition, whatever therapy you're going for. Mine, like I said, was silencing. And after that conditioning process with chemotherapy, when your cells are wiped out, they now infuse back into you your own cells that they've edited. And once that engrafts, you should start producing more hemoglobin F, which will now alleviate the symptoms of hemoglobin S, even though you still have it, but now you're producing hemoglobin F as well as hemoglobin S, essentially making me like I just have the sickle cell trait.
Okay. So, just a little bit of clarity for this, because when you say in utero, we want to be sure that everybody is understanding what you mean. And in essence, when you are a baby in your mother's womb, there's a lot of fetal hemoglobin because you are growing, you are a fetus. And so, what has basically taken place now is they have stopped your DNA from, no, into producing more fetal hemoglobin so that you have more normal red blood cells as opposed to sickled red blood cells. But they wiped out your immune system so that they can make room for your cells to engraft, your new cells to engraft, correct? Okay.
Yes.
So, what were some of the challenges that you encountered before the procedure, during the procedure, and after the procedure?
So some of the challenges before the procedure was just kind of like the unknown, like this therapy, although I had seen media stories about Victoria Gray, and actually I that heard firsthand directly from her how she was doing. We're still doing something that hasn't been done ever. So pre-transplant, I had a bit of that. After I had signed up and we were getting ready for the whole process, I had a bit of not fear, but just, man, this is big. We're going through something that has never been done before, at least at this scale. So just going into the unknown was there's a bit of fear there.
Of
And
course.
then during the transplant itself was for me the biggest challenges that I faced. One was the conditioning,
Okay.
the chemotherapy. Bilsafan was, as chemotherapy is, difficult to take, and the collection as well. Not many people know that. So it's not just one sitting. Your collection, it's an 8-hour thing, and depending on you, everyone's different. There are people that I heard had just one collection. I had four.
Oh, wow.
So I had to go through that period, and it's not like back to back because it's a really draining process. So it was like probably 3-4 month process just to collect enough stem cells, sitting next to this machine that literally separates blood and stem cells from you for about 8 hours. So that was also difficult. Also, the fact that you're kind of absent from your life for long periods of time, and for me in particular, I did with the fact that it was done during the pandemic, it was kind of isolating.
Mm,
So that could be another challenge I see people might face. Fortunately, I don't think they'll have to face it during a once in a lifetime pandemic, but still, at least for Exocell, ex vivo clinical trial, you will have to be in the hospital for long periods of time. And me, knowing myself, and I'm sure other people that have this disease, we hate hospitals. I know many times I've stayed at home when I should have gone to the hospital for a try just because I hated it. So that was something that I had to deal with, just being in a place that I considered purgatory for almost a whole year. It was a little difficult. Thankfully, the staff was fantastic.
Muted. Okay.
But yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. I'm very interested in understanding your process mentally during this whole ordeal. You mentioned when you first began, you found out your wife was pregnant, and you said you've been through it for a whole year. So I'm imagining now you have a baby, and you have your family while you're going through this ordeal. How was your mental health during this time? And how was it? How was your newly found role as a father incorporated into this ordeal? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So during the process, I would say my mental health was, at least in the beginning, was I was in a good place. Because I was one, I felt very fortunate to be taking part in a clinical trial that looks to be changing people's lives. At this point, I had spoken directly to probably two or three participants that had gone before me, and I could see the evidence that this, in fact, was working. So I was in a good place mentally at the beginning stages. It wasn't until when I got to the tail end of the clinical trial, when I had been infused with my new cells and was actually feeling better, that I noticed the decline in my mental health uh, because of, yeah, I was different. Um, One, I wasn't experiencing pain that I'd experienced for most of my life, so a little anxious, I would say, because you're so used to living a certain way with a certain disease, and all of a sudden it's gone. So I was anxious as to what my life is going to be like once I leave the hospital. I'm like, I'm not in pain anymore. Um, I don't know kind of who I am. We talked about the identity crisis that usually comes post transplant. So I experienced a bit of that. I was a little anxious, a little worried. Um, but I addressed those things as soon as I started feeling that way. I started addressing them really quickly.
So you mentioned you talked about the mental toll, but from day 0 to 100, I'm sure your body was experiencing some transition.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
how can you kind of tell the audience exactly what happened after, like, from day 0 and to day 100?
Yeah, your body is definitely going to go through the ringer from, the constant extraction of the stem cell that is going to leave you feeling weak multiple times. So it's the best way to explain it's like a yo-yo. You're constantly up and down because think of it, they take all of this blood out of you and then you're feeling weak and then they give you a blood exchange and then you're feeling strong again and then they take another bags of blood out of you, and then they give you an extra. You're just constantly up and down, and then you get to the chemotherapy, which was wildly confusing if you've never done chemotherapy before, because once you get infused, I got infused with busulfan for I think about 5 or 7 days, about 2 weeks rather, and I was expecting the symptoms to be instantaneous as soon as I got infused. And I'm like, all right, come on, where's the nausea? I want to feel this now and move on with it. It didn't hit me till probably 2 weeks after. And I thought I had escaped it actually. And the doctors were like, no, you can't escape the symptoms that are coming. So I was feeling positive. I'm like, doctor, it's been 2 weeks. I had to feel nothing. I'm, I'm the patient that escaped chemotherapy. So I'm like, no, you don't know science. It's impossible. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he just comes and he hits you, and then you're down for months, like not just weeks, months. Nauseous. I think I was nauseous for like 5 months post transplant. I was nauseous. So yeah, it was your body goes through a lot.
Okay, so um, as someone who's also gone through chemotherapy and busulfan, I recognize how challenging that period was. But let's bring our audience in and take them to those moments. For you, what were some of the side effects from chemo that you noticed after the 2 to 3 week process of going through busulfan? And how did you address each of those symptoms during that time?
So I think for me, one of the most uncomfortable symptoms was the debilitating mouth sores. Because you just think they're mouth sores, and you've had mouth sores that are not chemo induced. and you're like, oh yeah, I've had mouth sores before, I can definitely handle this. But this is like on another level that I think for me, the fact that I didn't understand how bad the mouth sores were gonna get, that's what actually even made it really challenging. I couldn't like talk for weeks. I couldn't open my mouth. So that was really, really hard. Of course, the nausea as well. Zofran was not working. As many you can ask for Zofran, Benadryl, nothing really alleviates. It's just one of those things. You just have to go through it, and that's what's gonna make you get better is getting on the other side of it. So those two things. Of course, there was a bit me, I guess, being a guy, and I always had my hair was always low cut. The hair loss didn't affect me too much, but I can imagine it. I've heard people, the hair loss really affected them as well. Um, Also, the hyperpigmentation, just looking at the mirror and looking like a zombie, literally looking like a zombie was sometimes scary. It just puts you in a state like, oh, I'm in a really bad shape, even though maybe you might not be in that bad shape, but seeing yourself look that way, it really terrifies you a little bit. So there was that. And I think for me, it was just going through all of those symptoms. The way I went through it was just mentally. I knew that these were moments were all fleeting, these moments were going to eventually pass, even though it's going to be a long period. They were just fleeting moments. And that really helped me get through them, knowing that they were going to end.
Thanks for giving us such detailed information, because I think for listeners, this will help them to be able to clearly visualize some of the side effects that might be coming their way should they choose to engage or sign up for these new gene therapy treatments. Now, can you kind of take us through? A lot of people know that before you go into the conditioning regimen process, they always give you a heads up that it could impact your fertility. So, did you and your wife undergo some type of fertility preservation? And what was that conversation and discussion like for the two of you?
Yeah, so we went through fertility preservation for sure, actually provided by the clinical trial. But before that, we had already gone through fertility preservation on our own before the transplant, because we were already having difficulties before we had started any transplant years ago having children. So we had already done all of that before we had signed up for the transplant, and the transplant even, in fact, offered that already, even after the fact that we had the separately outside of the clinical trial. So yeah, I mean, it's to each his own. Like we've discussed, one of the things I've always was one of my biggest goals was becoming a father, and we were unsuccessful to go in the natural route. So we were able to, do IVF before the clinical trial.
So thank you for that. Um, you you are successful in this whole gene therapy process, right? And could you tell us what life looks like now as a recipient?
Yeah, it's sometimes it's hard to put into words. Life is it's been almost a complete 180 turn from what life used to be like. Great quality of life, bounds of energy. It still feels, like a dream. Doing everything that I felt like I've always wanted to do that I did not have the ability to do before. I'm able to do now, and I think the most important thing is just the ability to control my own life. That for me is just unreal. It feels like I have powers just being able to control your life, and it shouldn't feel that way. That's normal. That's mundane. Everyone should be able to control their own life. But the fact that I'm able to, 38 years or 30, 35, 36, 78 years into my life feels kind of special. So life is great. Like I said, I'm a father. I'm doing things that I couldn't do before. even before the clinical trial, I've always been a person that has been driven and ambitious. So I I've been able to capture all of the great foundation that I'd laid for myself while I had the disease and I wasn't able to capitalize on. Now that I no longer have like the shackles of sickle cell holding me back. I'm able to go and capitalize on all of the hard work that I had done prior to that. I like to explain it like it feels like finding another gear, in a car, and you're constantly just driving on gear one or gear two, and then having this clinical trial has allowed me to go into gear three, four, and five because I'm able to do things that I wasn't able to do before.
So, based on that, would you recommend CRISPR gene therapy to other warriors?
No, not really. And I say that because I think everyone has a different journey in life. So I definitely would say it works and I would recommend it to someone like me who's but no one's like me, you know? So it really depends on where you are at in your life. I know some people that have sickle cell and they rarely go to the hospital, and what's the point of going through some type of trial that I don't think it puts your life in jeopardy at all, but it definitely is not an easy, it's a one-time cure. But if you're doing great, is it worth it to go through the whole process just to feel a little bit better? You know, so it really depends on when you're like. So I would recommend it, and I shouldn't the way I answered that first, it came out the wrong way. I would recommend it, in fact, for people that are in specific places in their life that they can see, yeah, I'm in a really bad place, and this has a potential to, save my life. But it'll have to be um, the person making their own decision.
Thank you for sharing that. Because the reality is, I think one of the reasons why they make an eligibility criteria is to even see, is your sickle cell chronic enough for them to consider you to participate in this treatment, because it is a grueling process and I think it is an individual decision because no two bodies are alike. We're all dealing with a very list of complications. And so if it doesn't make sense for you, then why remotely consider it, especially for those who were relatively able to manage their disease where they're out of the hospital for the most part. But there was something I missed at the beginning of this conversation that I would like to kind of circle back to. You mentioned that prior to the gene therapy process of them taking your cells and then taking it to the lab and editing it. Now, let's kind of go back a little bit. During that process when of apheresis, where they were giving you the medications and then taking your stem cells, what were they doing to manage your sickle cell complications? Because I would imagine that a lot of stress is being put on your body while they are having to remove these stem cells. So what were they doing to help you manage your symptoms then? And did you stop any disease modifying therapies prior to that process?
So great question. Yeah. Absolutely. So while you're going through a clinical trial like this, your body is under immense stress. So I went through crises many times, and typically the way they did it was just the routine standard of care ways that we typically take care of crises. I'm a hematologist only. This was actually better because, one, the care team, when I've been seeing adult hematologist for my adult life, and the group I went to, they're a pediatric group, so you get to see pediatric group that treats you like you're a kid again. They take good care of you. They actually care about your pain, and they actually care about how you're feeling, and fantastic bedside manners. And so you get the pain medications as needed, and blood transfusions, blood exchanges, all the standard of care stuff that usually goes with treating sickle cell and sickle cell crises is exactly the way they treat it, but even better, I would say.
Were you on any disease modifying therapies prior to the therapy treatments? Hydroxyurea, Oxbryta?
I was on hydroxyurea, yes.
Okay.
hmm I'd started that, and I think I actually had it in two periods in my life. When I was younger and more immature, I would say, and
Mhm.
not consistently taking it as I should, so I didn't really see the effects then. And then as an adult, I also took it, and slightly, I think it definitely improved, or decreased the amount of times I had to go to the hospital for a crisis.
Okay.
Now that you have undergone the whole gene therapy process, do you feel any symptoms now? Or do you have any other lingering symptoms besides the congestion and the postnasal drip? Do you have any like pain or anything like that?
Pain wise, not really. I mean, I still experience pain because I'm human, but the fantastic thing is like I don't need um pain medication over narcotic pain medication to alleviate my pain. I don't even need over the counter medication these days. Like I have just regular pain from a long, hard day work, and then I'm able to go to sleep and wake up feeling rejuvenated and the pain's gone. So the only pain I do have is from the avascular necrosis, and that, thankfully for me, it's mild enough where I'm still able to be extremely active without needing pain medication or needing a hip replacement. Um, Aside from that, not too many other things. I mean, I have like other complications, like you had mentioned, the chronic sinusitis, avascular necrosis. I'm not tired at all. In fact, I feel like sometimes I have too much energy. Um, yeah, so not much, no.
I am excited for you, beyond overjoyed, because I think every time you speak about where your life is now, you light up. And I can only imagine what that must feel like for your friends and family who have seen you go through some of the most challenging parts of sickle cell disease and now seeing you on the other side better in every facet of the word better physical health, um, mental health, emotional health, even just you socially. It's you have a new lease on life. But now let's step back for a bit. If you were to look at your life, or if you had a do over in life, would you still embark on the gene therapy treatment? And if yes, why?
Oh, definitely. I'm a big believer of, um, I think it's called amora fati, which
Mhm.
means love your faith. So I would, if I could have another hand at doing life, I would probably do it exactly the same way. Or I should reword that and say, I don't regret anything, even I think that's my journey. So definitely everything that I've gone through and I'm going to go through was destined for me. And I find learnings in each and every destination I find myself, from uh, when I was living in the throes of the disease of sickle cell and younger. I used to be so, as most of you would can testify to, upset, depressed, angry, hate the world. And obviously, I'm saying this now because I'm on the other side of it. So I want to be aware that I am biased now because I'm on the other side. But I feel that I needed to go through all of these things to be the person I am today. Um, I remember one of the things I opened up to my doctor, the doctor that did the transplant for me, was after I had gone through the transplant and I was like feeling great. I was in a place of despair because I was feeling great. I'm like, wow, imagine if I felt like this 20 years ago. Imagine if I felt like this 30 years ago. only God knows what I could have accomplished or what my life could have looked like now, and then I started on that mental health journey, and I had come to learn that yeah, possibly your life may, but that was not the life that was meant for you. You were meant to go through. Yes, it's harder, and many times you almost lost your life, but you were meant to go through all of that to be the person that you are today. And yes, it was difficult. Yes, it was unfair, but that was your journey, and I, you still don't know where that's going to take you, but it's going to take you somewhere.
Jimmy, you shared your journey through the pain and you shared your journey through the genes. Now that everything is full circle, what does the future hold for you and your family?
Something good, I hope. So, in terms of what it holds, I have no clue, to be completely honest. I have no clue. So that's one thing I've really learned in life and going through the journeys that we all go through. For me, at least, the way I see it, I really don't have any goals. We have like overarching goals that of things that but I don't count them anymore. What I focus on now is just like the day to day, each day just being steadfast. So what the future holds for me and my family is that we are going to continue to do the work that we do on a daily basis to advance our lives, my life. And although we do have goals that, we have as a family, the the main thing is just being there each and every single day, doing everything that we need to, taking it one day at a time to get to the next place, and hopefully that'll take us to the places we want to get to.
I like that. One day at a time, because I say this, well, I mean, you can't say this enough times. I think people assume that when you are on the other side, life just kind of falls into place. And the reality is, life has its ebbs and flows, and you just kind of take it one day at a time. There are nuances to life on the other side that maybe we hide well, I would say mental health becomes almost center stage when you're on the other health, because there is a lot of coping strategies and mechanisms that you develop as you navigate sickle cell disease. And so now that you're on the other side, you're then having to unpack some of those things, but truly living in the present moment, and but also sitting in your joy at moments where you can see the before and the after is so, so important. So thank you, Jimmy, for sharing your transformative story with us. That's the word I
Thank
wanted.
you, thank you. And you're so right with um just what it's like post transplant. I think and to be fair, there has been there needs to be a lot of grace with people on the other side, because life is life. No matter how good you're feeling, life is still gonna life. And that's one thing I had to learn. Like for the first couple of years, I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm playing life on easy mode, like going through sickle cell and now not having it anymore. I'm putting in quotes. I felt like life was a cheat code, but then life started throwing other life things at me that I wasn't prepared for. I was like, oh, I never had to deal with this before. So, now I have to go learn how to do that. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that is not highlighted enough. So I wanted to echo on that. That it's still life stuff that goes on, even if you've gone through a transformative transplant. That still makes life challenging at times.
On the next episode of Through the Genes, we're thrilled to welcome a very special guest, Jimmy's wife, Amanda Olaghere. Amanda will join us to share her unique perspective as a caregiver throughout the gene therapy journey.
Pediatric oncology unit, you can only have one person, so it was just me that was allowed to stay in the hospital. So it was, they were there for me to support me, but they weren't able to the way that we planned on it. But I don't know. I thought this was kind of just a universal, like a woman thing. But maybe I'm just crazy.
Through the Genes is funded by the National Human Genome Research Institute, part of the National Institutes of Health, through the Democratizing Education for Sickle Cell Disease Gene Therapy Project. Don't forget to follow Sickle Cell Prodigy and Through the Pain Inc. for additional resources and initiative updates. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Through the Genes.